Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 14.21 ADC tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes for this patch towards the ADC role. We saw a nerf towards Bork for ranged champions, which did hurt a decent chunk of the ADC pool. We also saw buffs towards Sivir, Xayah to underperforming ADCs. We saw an overbuff to Corki. That champion is obviously being nerfed in 14.22, but it's definitely overperforming at the moment. We also saw quality of life to Nyla, and we saw some nerfs towards some of the overperforming mages here. But let's get into it. The D tier is going to consist of two champions at the moment. One is Zeri, who I believe to be probably the worst ADC at the moment. The champion just doesn't really function that well early on into the game. Also doesn't really scale quite as aggressively as some of the other options. It can definitely be a case of where if you find your tempo within the fight and you're allowed to stack up, feel useful with lethal tempo, then it can be effective. You can definitely get some value from that. But the difficulty of piloting the champion combined with its unique play style, the DPS just being kind of on the low side at the moment compared to where she has been in the past, it's just not a pick I'd really recommend. Callista obviously did get hit by Bork being nerfed this patch and drops back down to the D tier. This champion's obviously very elite skewed, very competitive skewed, is reliant on good synergies and being effectively useful with your support, rotating your W effectively. All that can kind of just equate to her being a relatively bad mid to low elo pick. Just something I'm not really going to recommend, obviously on top of the fact that she's very early game skewed and very much relies on like a Bork Ginsu's power spike to really kind of power through the game. The C tier is getting a bit of a shift around, so Smolder is still here. Champion obviously tends to take a bit too long to get going and can definitely feel quite difficult to pilot, especially against some of the like harass lanes early on into the game. Obviously, if this champion's allowed to free scale and get to like really strong mid and late game breakpoints, then it can be really powerful and definitely a very potent champion, which is why it kind of has the upper kind of just tier over Zeri. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. The champion still, does struggle early, can definitely be very much punished, does sit in the C tier, but has a bit more potential at the moment. Tristana has been on the rise. This pick obviously got got a pretty heavy shift around in her power. It's now looking like she's leaning more towards Collector as being a good first option for her, allowing her to snowball, just output a lot of DPS. Obviously, she does have a bit more mana problems than she has done in the past. Obviously, that being slapped on her Q does definitely hurt her a bit. Combined with that, they made it so her range is obviously very aggressive later on into the game as well, and that can definitely feel quite powerful. She's definitely in one of the better spots she's been in the ADC role for a while. Obviously, she used to be a good ADC option back before she kind of like took over mid lane and they had to quite aggressively nerf her down because of that. Overall, Tristana sits towards the higher end of the C tier. Wouldn't be surprised if she makes the jump into the B tier as more people shift over to better builds and put some more mastery into the champion. Lucian has been underperforming for a while. He sits as like a C tier option. If you're good at piloting the pick, you can definitely get a lot out of it. If you're not great at piloting it, it's not really a champion you need to pick up at the moment. Tends to be a bit more reliant on good support synergies as well, and then utilizing the effectiveness of his ability ranges to really like power through with this kind of a pick. Other champions within the C tier, we have two dropping down. So we have Twitch and Varus. Both these champions obviously were Bork users, and both of them did get tagged this patch. Twitch is in a pretty rough spot at the moment. Definitely for solo queues, he's probably in the worst spot he's been in for like 3 years. In Varus's case, he's being buffed up in 14.22. Twitch isn't, unfortunately, for like your Twitch mains. In Varus's case, he does have obviously flexibility with his builds and can definitely opt into a couple more things. Twitch is quite locked to what he usually goes, like your Bork, your Runans, your IE free item claw. That tends to be what you're looking at. In Varus's case, did take a bit of a hit this patch. Lethality has been quite aggressively nerfed, especially for solo queue. Obviously, in competitive, it can definitely function better, where you are given more time to really output a bit more damage before looking to a fight. When in solo queue, you're just looking at like these fight angles consistently, it can definitely struggle to really find the time to really like rack up that damage. Varus sits as a C tier option. His ult's still a very powerful tool though, and you can definitely get a lot of value out of that. Vayne sits towards the lower end of the B tier. She's being buffed next patch. She's kind of been quite heavily nerfed out of the top lane, so most of the time you'll see Vayne as a bot lane option at the moment. The 10 AD being slapped onto her ultimate will definitely help her. I definitely think that will bring her back up as like a good B tier, maybe like a low A tier option. But the Bork nerf this patch definitely did hurt her. She now sits as a low B tier option. Ezreal, still relatively underperformant, but obviously has very high highs. If you're good at piloting this champion, then he can definitely like surpass up into the A tier or A and S tier. If you're not great at piloting Ezreal, it's fine. You don't need to learn him at the moment. He's not a crucial champion to have within the meta, but he can definitely be rewarding, especially if you can pick him in angles where other marksmen aren't quite as good. Draven and Samira really comes down to piloting the picks and snowballing early game. If you can get these champions going, they can be incredibly oppressive and be really valuable as like champions within your arsenal. If you're not great at that kind of thing, like you're not great at like converting early leads, you struggle finding those advantages early onto the game. But once again, they're not champions you need to play at the moment, but they're pocket picks which can definitely have value when you are very confident in your ability to stomp early on into the game. Syndra has been removed. She just didn't really support the play rate to maintain a spot on the bot lane tier list. Lux I've added back in. She sits as a low A tier option at the moment. This champion can function well just across 3 different roles. She has a good amount of burst and a good amount of wave clear. Her range is pretty solid. There's just a lot of strengths to Lux. Obviously her lack of mobility can be punishing, so there's definitely also a weakness there, and she doesn't have obviously the DPS most of the marksmen are going to have, but her damage is obviously, and her burst are obviously very strong parts of her kit and can definitely be very rewarding if you're consistently landing combos. Other champions within the B tier, we have Xayah. So she got buffed this patch. She moves up. She's definitely in a better spot now. She was very much struggling for a while. Like you could only really pick her in like very conditional spots, but she can definitely be picked a bit more often now. Obviously rewarded when you're pairing her with the likes of Rakan. She can really benefit from a pairing like that. And then yeah, you want to utilize her as a fullback option, a champion which enemy team has a lot of dive. You can kind of bring her out and definitely feel quite rewarded about that. Aphelios moves into the B tier. This might surprise a lot of people, but Aphelios is very much on the rise at the moment. He's doing actually quite well for mid and low elo compared to... Actually, this might just be the best kind of time where... English. This might be the time where Aphelios has been best, like, across the lower ranks from maybe, like, close to his release. Aphelios is in a really good spot at the moment for the average player base. Wouldn't surprise me when the new competitive split gets picked up. Aphelios' pick or ban. That could genuinely happen. But the champion outputs a huge amount of damage. They did end up buffing that. And combined with the collector being buffed and some of the changes next patch, this champion could be in a really good spot. Wouldn't surprise me if it gets nerfed in 14.22, especially if he's like looking at the likes of Unitals with the changes to it. There's like a very strong option on him. But Aphelios, if you enjoy him, it's a perfect time to play him, really. Obviously, he's still very hard to like understand, especially with like all the gun rotations. That can definitely be like a unique aspect of the champion. And if you're not comfortable with him, he's not meta by any means, but he's definitely in a very good spot and definitely someone you can get a lot of wins with, especially if you're very comfortable on the pick. Yeah, so he was moving down to the B tier. Obviously got hit by Bork being nerfed this patch. He drops from the A tier to the B tier. He's still very good in this role, but this is like his best role for the most part. And if you're very comfortable playing him and you're pairing him with the likes of an engaged support with a knock-up, then he can definitely be very valuable and a very rewarding pick to play. Other champions then. So Brand is going to maintain his spot in the A tier. Actually, I've got one other pick I'm going to mention. Kai'Sa drops onto the B tier. They nerfed her passive damage this patch. She obviously is very, not, I wouldn't say hard to pilot, but obviously being a short range kind of assassin marksman and with like unique playstyle and aspects to her, she can definitely have like that unique kind of gameplay aspects which some of the other marksmen don't really have access to. And if you put the time in, she can still definitely rise back up to the A tier, but she just dropped down to the B tier for the more general player base at the moment. In Brian's case, he got nerfed this patch. He drops towards the lower end of the A tier. This champion can still definitely function with like Nami pairings, but he did lose some DPS. He did lose some mana, like the amount of mana he's going to have throughout the game. So it does kind of punish him if he's like overforcing abilities and over using abilities on the wave, for example. So he does drop towards the lower end of the A tier, but he's still a very valuable pick, especially if you can pilot him well. Sivir moves up to the A tier. I'm glad this champion got buffed. I think Sivir should be an A tier pick for the most part. She is one of the easiest marksmen to play in the game. She's very much revolving around her Q and her wave clear as like her two core abilities, and then kiting is like the main kind of thing past that. If you're spacing correctly within the fight, you can output a lot of DPS, especially the more items you get. She does scale up quite nicely with the amount of like AoE damage she can output. Sivir, great champion to start with. I think this pick should definitely be something you can be rewarded by playing. Jinx is going to sit towards the higher end of the A tier. She's definitely in a pretty solid spot at the moment. You can opt into like collector opportunity variants. That's still definitely something which exists on her, but you can just play more standard with likes of Kraken. I know statics sometimes can be what people opt into, and then like a PD, a not rapid fire. I mean, you can opt into rapid fire. Something like a Runen could be really nice as like a second slot, and then things like an IE. Obviously, a lot of builds are probably going to change next patch with the changes towards static and Yuntowers, but Jinx in her current state is definitely a high A tier option. Swain drops down to the B tier. Well, actually drops down to the C tier. Do I want him in the C or B tier? I'm going to put Swain in the C tier. The champion's obviously being buffed on 14.22, but got his rework this patch. He's underperforming, obviously. Most people know this at this point. Like, he's being played in 4 different roles, and he's just not doing great across the board. Support looks to be very bad, though, so if you're going to play Swain anywhere, your best bet is probably playing him in the bot lane. That is probably where he's the strongest as like a low B tier option. Actually, I'm going to have him as a high C tier. I just wouldn't really recommend playing him until he's buffed next patch, because the buffs looks huge, and it would definitely give you a more consistent feeling of the champion rather than playing a nerfed version to a buffed version. But if that's your kind of thing, like you like playing a weaker champion and then them getting buffed so you can really get a feel for the changes, then go ahead. Like, Swain's not terrible by any means, he's just considerably weaker than he was in the previous patch, obviously with the changes he received. Wayne moves down to the A tier. Obviously was one of my premier S tier picks last patch. I think he's a really good bot laner, and I think more people should probably be playing him. Definitely is like one of the better mage options here. Obviously considering the fact that Karthus basically isn't played in the bot lane anymore. Like, the thing is, Lux almost has triple the games of Syndra, who has more games than Karthus. Like, Karthus doesn't really get played in the bot lane anymore, which is kind of unfortunate because the champion's actually really good as a bot lane option. Like, I think he's an A tier pick. I'm going to leave him within the A tier, even though he just isn't really played that much. Obviously, if he consistently just doesn't really get played that much, then I think I'll just remove him, as it's kind of... It becomes just OTPs who pick the champion, which obviously skews data. And if I don't even really see the champion, then it's like going to be considerably harder to evaluate just how strong the pick is. But at the moment, I do think this pick is still a very solid A tier option, even with the nerfs to the ultimate. In Hui's case, yeah, he did get nerfed last patch. The nerf to his E and nerf to his QQ damage does hurt him a bit. Drops it down from the S tier to the A tier, but he's still a great mage option. I think that Seraphine is probably just the go-to at the moment, but yeah, he's still a very solid option. Ziggs and Veigar also sit towards the lower part of the A tier. Both these are still very good mage options within the bot lane. I think mages just within the bot lane in general, for the most part, do function quite well, especially the ones which have access to wave clear or good CC abilities, which they can utilize alongside support pairings. Oftentimes, if the ADC isn't great at spacing, you can punish them quite aggressively. You'll have oftentimes more damage output than them. Not DPS. ADC obviously is the class for DPS primarily. But the likes of Ziggs, great for sieging. Veigar has great scaling potential. Both these picks can definitely function quite well in the bot lane. MF was in my A tier last patch. She stays in my A tier. She's still a relatively easy, good go-to option. Ashe kind of goes the same. Ashe does scale quite aggressively into elite play. In fact, she's one of the best competitive options. The E being able to provide good vision, helping for scouting in jungle. The R being a great engage tool. Like, she has access to one of the best tools within the game. Her W obviously gives her harass, and like her DPS output is still very good. Combined with the Q and her slows, she can be very valuable addition to most drafts. She's not going to have the same level of damage output most marksmen do, but she can definitely, when ahead of the curve, still output a lot of DPS. So Ashe, yeah, still sits as a solid A tier option. Caitlyn is in one of the better spots she's been in as well. Obviously, if you pair her alongside a very aggressive support option, you can very much pressure the enemy bot lane outside of lane, sieging turrets, being able to just utilize her very oppressive range. Obviously, if you're not spacing effectively, this champion does lose a lot of value. You have to utilize the fact that she is a 650 marksman. I believe she's like the only one in that regard outside of like obviously Senna Soul passive and Tristana passive, and like a Velios green gun. She does have some of the most range in the bot lane, and you do have to utilize that, otherwise you lose a lot of value of the champion. But she's in a good spot at the moment, so yeah, go ahead, play her. Good A tier pick. I'm in my S tier, so I have 5 champions here. In Seraphine's case, she is probably the premier pick of this patch. Kog'Maw obviously took a bit of a hit with Bork being nerfed, so Seraphine does take that spot. She's being nerfed in 14.22, but for the moment, if you enjoy Seraphine ADC, she is the best option. Honestly, she's probably an S plus option in her current state. The other champions here are Kog'Maw. So Kog'Maw got nerfed a slight bit with Bork being hit, but Ginsu's Rush is still a very good option on him, especially when you have like a load of different ways you can build Kog'Maw. You have like AP variants, AP on-hit hybrids, just on-hit variants, you have on-hit tank variants. You could, the Ginsu's Rush into like a Runans or a Bork or Wit's End. There's just loads of tools that Kog'Maw has access to at the moment, and he's a great S tier pick for that reason. In Nyla's case, she got a quality of life. Well, okay, there's 3 changes they made to Nyla. First was a quality of life change in 14.20. They then micro-patched her because she was overpowered. They took a lot of power from her, and she dropped kind of close down to the A. I mean, she dropped down to the A tier, and then they changed her again this patch. They gave her some more quality of life changes, made her a bit more snappy, and kind of removed some of the animation lockouts, and she goes back up to the S tier. Nyla in a great spot at the moment. If you're very comfortable playing her, she can definitely be a good way to get a lot of LP. Corki, I mean, we all know how strong this champion is. This pick has definitely, has astronomically shot up in pick rate in both the bot lane, the mid lane, and even like the top lane, and hasn't shot up in pick rate in the top lane and the jungle, but has seen some play rate there. I know Agarin was playing Corki jungle, which is crazy to think about, but there we go. That's for the world we live in at the moment. Corki as a bot lane option, incredible pick. Obviously has absurdly high damage. If you're utilizing the full extent of his kit, he is one of the best picks at the moment. Obviously, most people don't have mastery on the champion, which is why his win rate looks slightly deflated at the moment, but if you put time into Corki, he is one of, if not just the best ADC champion of the patch. If you haven't put a lot of time into Corki and you're more comfortable on other options, you can still definitely make them function. Corki isn't necessary to have within your like picks at the moment, but he's very strong. And he is being nerfed next patch, so like you can kind of get away with not playing him if you feel like the nerfs are going to be enough to kind of like drag you away from a champion. And then Jhin, I don't like him being an S tier option personally. I think this pick has pretty clear drawbacks, and I think next patch with the assassins being helped quite a bit, Jhin will definitely fall down towards the A tier, but he's there. He's a good option. He has very high damage. He has great CC. He has great range. Doesn't have great tank killing capability, is weak to assassins, doesn't have the same level of DPS of a marksman, which is a unique aspect of the champion. And if you like him for that, then yeah, you should play him. He's obviously still very good and does deserve a spot on the S tier. But if you're not a fan of that and you want more DPS out of your marksman and you want more carry potential, you shouldn't really go to Jhin. You should go to more like a Kog'Maw, a Jinx, even like a Corki, an Ashe. All these things can just output more DPS than him, and can definitely function as better options. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the ADC tier list. If you want an AP option, you should really look at Seraphine. She's the best pick of the patch. But if you want DPS options, yeah, your Kog'Maws, your Jinxes, your Corkis can all work quite nicely there. Your Nylas, obviously, with your pairings can work. And Jhin has a bit more setup and range. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.